What if the simple act of writing could change the way you think over time? What if putting your thoughts on paper could create more room in your brain for possibilities than you haven't considered yet? And what if writing down pieces of your story gave you a place to recognize the things you've been carrying for years that you don't actually need anymore? Not everything needs to come with you into your next chapter. Some things may need to be examined, and some things may need to be understood differently. Some may need to be forgiven, and some things may finally be ready to be left behind. But here's what fascinates me: you don't necessarily know what those things are when you sit down to write. Sometimes you start writing about one thing, and three paragraphs later, discover something completely different underneath it. The act of writing for me became sacred time. The time belonged only to me and my inner self. That self pushed down during the hard things, and surprisingly, even during the breakthroughs. Because when you're accustomed to accomplishing and surviving and moving forward, you don't always stop long enough to understand what any of it did to you. Writing gave me back pieces of myself I didn't know were still there. And there's actual science behind what can happen when we take what is inside of us and put it into words. So, what could that mean for a woman standing at one of the biggest transition points of her life? You've left or you're preparing to leave a career that structured your time, rewarded your accomplishments, and influenced how you saw yourself for decades. Now you get to decide what happens next, not just with your business, with you. So get a cup of coffee or put in your AirPods. We're going to rediscover some pieces of you that need light. If we haven't met yet, I'm Susette Cado, founder of Innovate Launch, a curated experience for female founders leaving corporate for entrepreneurship. And this is episode 17 of the Launchpad Pod, your story unwritten. Let's go. The Launchpad Pod is a weekly podcast with marketing and business strategist Susette Cado, where we talk about what accomplished women leaving corporate for entrepreneurship face as they step into their next chapter. Welcome in. Growing up female in the 60s and 70s meant gender-specific gifts were pretty much the norm. I remember things like the Easy Bake Oven. That was a delight. Basically, a light bulb inside of a plastic oven that somehow got hot enough to bake a tiny cake about the size of a cookie. And we thought that was fabulous. However, it was nothing but inadequate for the job. There were hula hoops, which I couldn't make work for to save my life because apparently I wasn't the right shape. Mine would hit the floor before one revolution. And then there was the GAF Viewmaster, an educational toy where you inserted this little cardboard wheel and clicked your way through 3D pictures of places and animals and all sorts of things kids were supposed to be interested in. So while researching, I stumbled across this 1971 Viewmaster commercial featuring none other than my muse, Jodie Foster, when she was just 8 or 9 years old, hawking the thing as an ingenious invention of educational value. Jodie Foster, at 8 or 9, she had to start somewhere, right? But it was a hilarious foreshadowing of the woman she would become. Perhaps the most unique and certainly the most misunderstood gift we received was the beloved diary. You remember it. Dear Diary, a tiny little book, maybe 4 by 6 inches, with ruled pages and those shiny gold edges that made it seem really important. Mine was pink and it had flowers and rainbows and butterflies on the cover. And of course, there was the lock, a little metal clasp with two ridiculously tiny keys. Because apparently, what a girl had to say at 8 years old needed a security clearance. If you lost the key, you were effed. I could say so much about that little diary now, but what strikes me most is its size. Think about it. We were given this tiny little book to contain our thoughts about our lives. There wasn't room for much in there, and perhaps unintentionally appropriate for the time. Girls weren't exactly encouraged to have expansive thoughts about who they might become or what they wanted from life or what made them angry or what they questioned or what they might someday decide wasn't good enough for them. There were expectations. Be nice. Be pretty. Like boys. Don't be too loud. Don't be difficult. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. And whatever feelings didn't fit neatly inside those expectations, well, there was always that little diary. Write them down. Close the cover. Lock them away. There's something almost hilariously ironic about it now. We were given a tiny locked book for our private thoughts while simultaneously being pre programmed with a fairly specific picture of what we were supposed to want from life and who we were supposed to become. And maybe that's part of why, as a woman of a certain age, I find myself in almost complete rebellion. I'm certainly not alone. Ashley Judd, right? Scroll through Instagram for 10 minutes with the hashtag midlife, and you'll find plenty of women our age who appear to have reached the same conclusion. Apparently, rage comes much, much later. Maybe we finally need more than 4 by 6 inches. Maybe we need room to write things we don't intend to lock away. Maybe we need to write about the things we carried, the things we survived, the things we chose, the things we wish we hadn't chosen, those people we loved, the people we lost, the things that still piss us off, and the completely unexpected things that bring us ridiculous amounts of joy. Maybe the diary wasn't such a bad idea after all. We just needed a bigger book to write it in. So, I have a confession. I have never been a journaler. I wasn't the woman in my 30s who kept beautiful notebooks beside her bed or woke up every morning eager to write 3 pages about her feelings. I didn't meditate or do yoga or practice somatic breathing to keep the stress demons away. I learned about that later in life when I was actually old enough to understand why the hell I was doing it. But for most of my life, if something needed my attention, I just dealt with it and moved on. That's what strong women do, right? We just handle things. We get through the hard things. We carry them because there's not another choice. Through our lived experience, many of us learned that minimizing pain and desensitizing ourselves to unpleasantness was how strong women continue to grow past trauma and loss. Put it in the suitcase we renamed baggage. Close the lid. Pick the damn thing up and keep walking. One day I threw mine off a bridge and then I wiped my hands. Yep. So something else changes when you step away from a corporate career that has structured your days, responsibilities, and to some degree, your identity for decades. There is suddenly space, and space can be uncomfortable. You're now building a business. You may be excited about what comes next. You may finally have the freedom that you spent years wanting, but you also have something you may not have had in decades, and that is discretionary time. Time that belongs to you. How you spend it. Who are you when nobody else has scheduled your day? What do you want when the answer doesn't have to consider what your company or your boss, employees, spouse, children, or anyone else needs from you first? And what happens to everything you've been carrying around in that suitcase? Some of it deserves to come with you. Some of it needs to be examined with a discernment, and some may need professional help to go through its contents. And some of those contents may finally be ready to be left behind. And I'm not here to tell anyone how to take care of their mental health. I'm simply wondering whether we give ourselves enough opportunity to hear what's going on inside of us before we automatically reach for something that makes an uncomfortable feeling easier to ignore. For me, unexpectedly, one of those opportunities came through writing. I've written blogs for years. As a marketer, I understood the mechanics of content. Keywords, search engines, algorithms, search intent, what people were looking for, what Google wanted. God, Google's a pain in the butt. There was a purpose behind every word, but eventually I started writing differently. I wrote because I had something to say. I wrote about the things I believed, things that bothered me, things I learned the hard way, things I thought another woman might want to hear. And something happened. Writing wasn't simply helping me communicate what I thought. Writing was helping me understand what I thought. Putting something on paper requires you to stay with a thought a little longer. Sometimes you begin writing about one thing and then later discover something is deeply underneath it. And that made me curious. Recently, I listened to a discussion about neuroscience behind journaling and what happens when we put our experiences into words. It sent me down a rabbit hole. Big surprise, right? And there is real research behind this. So, 2022 systematic review and meta analysis examined 20 randomized controlled trials involving journaling and mental health. 17 of those studies used expressive writing, which typically involves writing about your deepest thoughts and feelings for about 20 minutes at a time. Overall, the researchers found a statistically significant improvement in mental health measures among people who journaled compared with control groups, although they were careful to note limitations in the quality and consistency of the available research. That's the disclosure they have to make, right? But what interested me wasn't that journaling was something like a miraculous cure or anything. The researchers didn't say that, but what struck me was how little it required. A piece of paper and a pen and maybe 20 minutes. So, permission from yourself to write honestly about what you're thinking and feeling. The same review found that expressive writing was the most commonly studied form of journaling and reported improvements across a number of the outcomes involving anxiety, depression, and PTSD. But the researchers also emphasized that more high quality research is needed before sweeping conclusions can be made. Another disclosure. But that's important to me because I'm careful about saying journaling rewires your brain. That's what some people were saying. Neuroscience is considerably more complicated than that, but journaling's not magic and it's not therapy. But it isn't a replacement for a professional mental health care when we need it. But I'm interested in something much simpler. What might happen if we gave ourselves a regular place to tell ourselves the truth, not to perform or polish it or to post it online, just to write it? And then there's another reason I've been thinking about this. Look what's happening with Substack. Millions of people are choosing to subscribe directly to individual writers. In March of 2025, Substack announced it had reached 5 million paid subscriptions. People are actually paying to read what other people think. Why? I don't think we're suddenly developing longer attention spans. I wonder if we're hungry for something else. For years, we've been trained to create content for machines as much as people. Keywords for Google, hooks for LinkedIn, reels for Instagram, trending sounds, character counts, algorithms. You know what I'm talking about. I've done it, right? I've taught people how to do it. That's not what you do when you're journaling. And I understand why all of that matters. But somewhere along the way, we started editing ourselves for the algorithm before giving ourselves an opportunity to figure out what we actually want to say. So maybe Substack's extraordinary growth is telling us something. Maybe we're tired of being fed content. Maybe we want to hear from people again. So that's why I began what this has turned into. It's what began happening to me when I stopped allowing keywords and algorithms to determine everything I wrote. I started telling stories, and when I wrote something honestly from my own experience, another woman would sometimes recognize herself in it. That matters to me. Stories create a conduit between people who may never meet. Hey, this happened to me. Wow, me too. Maybe she feels understood for 5 minutes. Maybe something you learned makes what she's experiencing a little less frightening. Maybe your story simply reminds her that somebody else has walked through something difficult and come out on the other side. But before our stories become content, they belong to us. Some should remain ours forever. Others may eventually become something another woman needs. Journaling brings the story inward, and storytelling carries it outward. I've been also watching something interesting happen among women I've followed in the online business world. Jenna Kutcher built the Goal Digger podcast into enormous success. After nearly a decade and 968 episodes, she paused it. In explaining the decision, she wrote that questioning the places where she continued performing because she was good at something rather than doing it because it still lit her up. So she just wasn't feeling it anymore. And then Amy Porterfield made an even bigger decision and retired Digital Course Academy after nearly a decade, a program that served more than 28,000 business owners and generated more than $54 million. She just said that the decision wasn't the result of burnout or boredom. She began feeling pulled toward what she described as the next season of her work. Again, not because it failed. Think about that. How many of us were taught to walk away from something making money because it no longer represented what we wanted? We weren't. We were taught to climb, then climb some more, right? Then protect whatever we've climbed high enough to reach. And I wonder whether women can leave corporate America only to accidentally recreate the same thing in entrepreneurship. It's a different office, a different title, a different paycheck, same measurement, accomplishment. At some point, can I do this? Stops being the question, and because we know we can do it. Do I still want to? Right? That's the question that we're asking. My goals for myself these days are more organic. I'm creating work around thinking that is powerfully introspective. I'm also paying attention to things I might once considered small and have come to understand aren't small at all. Fresh flowers on my table every week, my passion for music and cooking, my 8 goats who could care less what I accomplished that day, being Nan to my 2.5-year-old grandson, Cash, who can light me up simply by being in the same room. These are threads in the fabric of the new story I'm weaving in my heart. Sometimes I write them down because I need them preserved, not published, not optimized, preserved. Maybe that's one of the things I finally figured out about writing. Not everything we write needs an audience. Sometimes we write because a moment deserves to be remembered. Sometimes because something hurts and we need somewhere to put it. Sometimes because we're changing and want to understand what's happening. And sometimes because life is so damn good in that particular moment that we want to capture what it felt like to be there. I've had opportunities cross my path at another point in my life I might have felt obligated to consider. Now I can't even pause long enough to consider them. I'm in love with my life and I'm becoming fiercely protective of the things that make it mine. I don't care if I have to churn my own butter, read by candlelight, and eat dinner at home every night instead of going to a restaurant. I do not need another high earning job. I know there are women out here who will counter this and say, oh, I can have money and joy, and that's you doing you. I learned at a very young age there are trade offs with everything. Knowing what to choose isn't always obvious until much later in life. I'm doing my life this way. And that doesn't mean I've stopped being ambitious. It means I'm much more particular about what deserves my ambition. I no longer want accomplishment at the expense of experiencing my own life. This is part of why I decided to create curated visibility experiences just for women, because we show up differently. We show up with passion and compassion. We're willing to examine what may be a little broken and dive into what it means to fix it. Not simply so we can stand completely upright again, but so we can fly. I've had enough trauma in my life to fill a suitcase. I probably should have checked at the curb a long time ago. I never let it take me down. And that doesn't mean I always handled everything beautifully. I'm not going to pretend I didn't occasionally overcompensate the dopamine rush of some Bluebell homemade vanilla or a whole bottle of cab. I did, but I came out ahead, and I believe you can too. And it's not because there's some magical point where nothing hurts anymore, not because life suddenly becomes fair, and certainly not because one morning we wake up having figured everything out. I think part of it is learning to choose joy. Each day is joy. I choose it. Joy. And if I forget what that looks like, I've learned where to find it. I can walk over to the fresh flowers on my table and inhale them. I can grab cash and take them for a golf cart ride while the sun goes down over the deep green countryside dotted with cows. I love cows. I can turn on music. These aren't insignificant things I squeeze in around the important parts of my life. They are the important parts of my life. And poet Andrea Gibson has a phrase I will probably reference forever. She calls these things vitamins for the spirit. God, those words peel layers of angst away from me every time I hear them. This is also why I decided the journal couldn't feel like another assignment. The lined pages aren't numbered. They aren't dated. There isn't a box waiting to shame you because you missed Tuesday. I've divided it into 4 sections. Each includes a short story I share, a coloring page for my artistes, and a quotable quote. And then there are blank lined pages. Your pages. Maybe you write 4 pages at 2 in the morning and don't touch it again for 3 weeks. Maybe you color. Maybe you write something you never said out loud. Maybe you write something hilarious. Maybe you realize you're happier than you thought you'd be. There's no falling behind because there's nowhere you're supposed to be. 4 times during the year, you're not being asked for quarterly KPIs. You're being given an opportunity to pay attention to yourself. I don't believe accomplished women need to be rebuilt. We've been through it. We built careers and families and relationships and lives, and we've survived stuff. We've accomplished things. We've learned things nobody could have taught us in a course. Perhaps what we need now is space to decide what we're taking with us, what can stay behind, what still needs attention, and what brings us joy, what deserves our discretionary time. We're extraordinarily good at, but simply don't want to do it anymore. And who we are when nobody needs anything from us. This is the visibility I'm increasingly interested in creating for you. Yes, I want to see your business to be seen. I want your ideas, your lived experience, your voice to reach people who need them. But I want something else too. I want the woman doing the becoming to be visible to herself. Before we ask the world to see us, perhaps we need to become willing to look closely at ourselves, at what hurts, and at what we're finished carrying, what lights us up, and what we want more of, at the life we're finally ready to choose deliberately. Maybe that's why I'm becoming such a believer in the blank page. Not every story needs to be shared. Some stories are ours alone, but every once in a while, something we write for ourselves becomes something another woman needs to hear. When we're ready, we can tell it. Until then, there are plenty of blank pages. Your story from here is still unwritten. And this time, you get to decide what happens next. Maybe something you heard today made you think more deeply. Maybe it jogged a memory, a person, something you miss, something you're still carrying. Girl, let that shit go. Don't rush past it. That's the part I want you to pay attention to. Be intentional. Close the door, light a candle, and give yourself some sacred time. 5 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever belongs to you that day. And write with spontaneity. Give yourself time and grace. No judgment here. No one to impress. Because this next chapter is only about what you're leaving behind. It's about noticing what you want to carry forward. I created the journal for women who are walking with me in community. It doesn't have dates or numbered pages. I'm not interested in giving accomplished women another assignment to complete or a box to check. It's sized to fit in your Chanel purse, a backpack, or on your nightstand. Put it wherever you are. Rediscover pieces of yourself that have been waiting for a little light. And maybe somewhere in those pages, you'll write something that eventually becomes part of the story you share with someone else. Your story from here is still unwritten. And this time, you get to decide what happens next. So I'm inviting you to join me in the Launch VIP community where accomplished women who leave corporate for entrepreneurship go for belonging, collaboration, and learning opportunities. You can find the link in the show notes. I'm Suzette, and I'm thanking you for spending this discretionary time with me because I see you, I support you, and I want you to be successful. I'll see you on the inside. Take care.